Murder cases are often the hardest to solve. Frequently, it is a small hint or a missed clue that cracks the case, leading to an arrest and conviction. But today, we are taking a look at some truly unusual murder cases that were solved in the most unconventional ways. What is up, Iwu crew? Today, we are taking a look at 3 cases where the victims solved their own deaths after they had died. In many ways, these are the victims who got the truest form of revenge, as they are the ones who name their killers and ensure that justice is served. Our first case is one that proves the importance of taking a closer look at clues, as they just might reveal exactly what you are looking for. In 2003, Amarjit Chauhan was a successful businessman with the Seba Freight Company in London, England. The 46-year-old lived with his 25-year-old wife, Nancy, their 2 young sons, 18-month-old Devinder and 2-month-old Ravinder, and Nancy's mother, Karanjit Kaur. Amarjit's work with his fruit and vegetable distribution company had made him rich. In fact, he was reported to be a multi-millionaire. And though he was flourishing, everything was about to go terribly wrong for the family. On February 15, 2003, Nancy called her brother, Onkar Verma, who lived in New Zealand. She told him that she was worried because she hadn't heard from Amarjit and that he hadn't returned to their home after he was meant to have finished work. Apparently, she couldn't get him on the phone, but when she contacted the freight company where he worked, she was told he had gone on a supposed urgent business trip to the Netherlands. Nancy had told her brother that she was upset because Amarjit hadn't told her about the trip himself. What's more, she doubted that he could travel, as his passport was reportedly being held by the UK government, as he had applied for permanent residency. She didn't understand why his employees would have lied to her about her husband's whereabouts. Then, things became even more concerning when she received a message from Amarjit, which said that he would be back soon. The problem was, he always messaged her in Punjabi, and this one was written in English. Things just weren't adding up. But another twist came when Onkar could no longer get a hold of his sister. After worrying for a few days, he decided to contact Scotland Yard on February 19th. When the family's London flat was visited, however, Onkar was told that there was no sign of Nancy, nor anyone else. In fact, there were no clues at all about what had happened to the Chauhan family or where they could have gone. The house wasn't disturbed, no clothing had been taken, and the children's toys were still on the ground where they had been dropped. As there was no sign of a struggle, investigators considered the chance that the family had simply left their home in a hurry. Further investigation began to suggest that the family may have been kidnapped. It was discovered that Amarjit hadn't been heard from since February 14th, while his family was last seen on February 16th. The investigation was stunted from the beginning, with no sign of where the Chauhan family had gone. But on March 24th, a typewritten letter was sent to Amarjit's place of work, which stated that he and his family had moved to Calais, France, where they were living happily, but they would soon travel to India. This was impossible, as the UK's government still had the family's passports. Despite this lead, it didn't bring investigators any closer to finding the Chauhan family. They appeared to have simply vanished. But then in April, during a family's canoeing trip along the Bournemouth Pier, they discovered something horrible in the water. A body. It belonged to Amarjit. Further investigation found Nancy's body in the same area, though it wasn't uncovered until July, while her mother's body was discovered off the Isle of Wight in a bay in November. The 2 baby boys' bodies were never found. Now that the case was a murder investigation rather than missing persons, Authorities began looking into every possible means to find out who could have killed the Choen family. At first, there was nothing to help investigators. But then, from beyond the watery grave, Amarjit managed to leave a final clue for detectives to discover. Something had alerted Amarjit before his death. He began to suspect that his life was in danger, and that someone might soon try to kill him. He decided that the best way to alert the police to his suspicions was write a letter. Amarjit was killed before he could send it, but that didn't stop him from alerting police to his suspicion about who might be the one to kill him. During the initial examination of Amarjit's body and clothing, nothing appeared amiss. There was evidence that he had been gagged, and a blood toxicology report showed that he had been exposed to high levels of a sedative, but this fit the police theory that he had been kidnapped. It wasn't until months later, when Amarjit's sock was more closely examined, that the letter was discovered. Just before he had died, Amarjit had tucked the letter deep into the folds of his sock, and knowing his eventual fate, he was likely hoping that its contents would help solve his death. Even though the paper had been completely soaked through by seawater, Detective Chief Inspector David Little said that the ink was still legible because of how Amarjit had tightly folded the paper. He had folded the letter with the ink on the inside many times over and over, preserving the important words within. The actual contents of the letter turned out to be unimportant. However, Amarjit had addressed it to Kenneth Regan, and it was dated February 12th, the day before Amarjit went missing. Authorities immediately began looking into Regan, who was allegedly a known drug dealer with a criminal record. Police used cell phone site analysis, and they quickly put together a promising timeline. Amarjit's phone was traced to be near Stonehenge on the 13th, and Regan, along with the men believed to be his accomplices, Bill Hornsey and Peter Rees, were allegedly also shown to be in the same area. The site analysis also showed that Regan and Hornsey were near the Choen family home on the same day they went missing. Police allege that Regan's motive was purely greed. They theorized that his plan had been to kill Amarjit and his entire family so he could gain control of his multi-million-dollar freight company and use it to bring drugs into the country. An article by Medium.com reports that Regan made Amarjit sign blank papers, which he then purportedly later typed on to say that the millionaire had handed the company over to him. Police believe that for several days, Amarjit was tied up and held hostage at his own house before he was finally killed, and he and his family's bodies were eventually dumped in the sea. As police closed in on Regan, Hornsey, and Rees, the men fled. Rees was found hiding in Gloucestershire, while Regan and Hornsey managed to get on a ferry to Calais, where they were on the run from authorities for a few months. Regan was eventually arrested in Belgium, and soon after, Hornsey gave himself up at Dover. During the ensuing trial, all three men denied any role in the Choen family's death, and Regan even alleged that an Asian gang had killed the Choens and forced him to dispose of their bodies. However, the letter Amarjit wrote, along with other evidence, was used to help convict the men. According to The Guardian, all three were sentenced to life imprisonment, with Regan and Hornsey being found guilty of the family's murders, and Rees sentenced for Amarjit's murder and convicted of assisting an offender, but cleared of the other 4 murder charges. The next case we have for you today is something right out of a spy movie. And yet, it's all true. In order to understand the case best, we have to do a bit of history. Many of us have heard of the KGB, which used to be the main security agency for the Soviet Union. The KGB's main reason for existence was to quell any dissent, which was largely seen as anyone harboring anti-communist ideology within the Soviet Union. The KGB is still infamous today for their reportedly violent methods. When the Soviet Union ended, the KGB was replaced with the lesser-known FSK, and then the FSB, which reportedly operated similarly. This is where our case begins. Alexander Litvinenko was born in Voronezh, Russia in 1962. His career flourished as soon as it began, graduating from the Kirov Higher Command School and becoming a platoon commander in the Soviet ministry in 1985. The next year, he was reportedly recruited by the KGB as an informant in the counterintelligence section. By 1988, he is said to have transferred to the KGB's 3rd Chief Directorate before he officially became an operational KGB officer. In this role, Alexander saw active military service and began to focus on the infiltration of organized crime within Russia. His name and career became known to the Western world, and the media began referring to him somewhat inaccurately as a Russian spy. In fact, he only dealt in secrets regarding organized crime groups. In 1995, the KGB, which had become the FSK in 91, was replaced with the FSB, but Alexander's career remained largely the same until in 1997, when he was promoted to the FSB Directorate of Analysis and Suppression of Criminal Groups. Everything seemed to be going well for Alexander, but that wouldn't last. In his work, Alexander discovered some things that were better left unknown, at least for his own safety. He purportedly found incriminating links between top brass of Russian law enforcement agencies and Russian mafia groups. Alexander had earned his prosperous career by ruthlessly seeking out and getting rid of organized crime groups. And so, in 1998, when he discovered corruption within the highest levels of Russian law enforcement, he attempted to bring it to the attention of his superiors, including a man named Vladimir Putin. Putin would become prime minister in 1999. Alexander brought his proof of corruption in the FSB to Putin, and Alexander later reflected on the meeting, saying, "I could see in his eyes that he hated me." Still, Alexander did not give up, and he held a press conference regarding the corruption. This resulted in his dismissal from the FSB, but more concerningly, Alexander had put a target on his back and made enemies of very powerful men. Though he was reportedly ordered not to leave Moscow, Alexander and his family fled to London in October of 2000, seeking political asylum and protection. He was granted asylum in 2001. Though he was reportedly convicted of charges of corruption back in Russia, Alexander began a prominent career as a journalist and author in England, even coining the term mafia state to describe Russian politics. Alexander once again found himself within the web of spying, as he was allegedly recruited by MI6 in England to consult on organized crime in Europe, but mostly Russian-related mafia activity. In 2006, he was even set to give a statement in Spain about Russian mafia influence within Spanish borders. It was his involvement in this perilous line of work that would come back to haunt him. On November 1st, 2006, Alexander suddenly felt very ill. 2 days later, he was admitted to a hospital in London, but he was soon moved into intensive care. His illness didn't make sense. At only 44, Alexander was a healthy and strong man, and his symptoms didn't look anything like the doctors had seen before. He had severe diarrhea and vomiting, but also could barely walk. After a series of tests, it was determined that Alexander was suffering from poisoning. But not just any poisoning. He had been given polonium-210, a highly rare and toxic element. Alexander had acute radiation syndrome. Polonium-210 is one of the deadliest toxins, about 250 billion times more toxic than hydrogen cyanide. 1 gram of polonium-210 could kill 50 million people and make 50 million more ill. Alexander could have died after consuming less than 1/1,000,000th of that amount. But how on earth had Alexander come in contact with such a rare poison in the middle of London? Alexander knew he was going to die. There was no way to survive the poison that was coursing through his veins and shutting down his organs as it went. But he wasn't going to die without first catching the people who had poisoned him. The day that he had first become sick, Alexander had met with Dmitry Kovtun and Andrei Lugovoy at the Millennium in London. Alexander and Lugovoy had once worked together in the FSB. The men had met up to chat about old times, just as they had previously in October. While together, Alexander took a few sips of the green tea that they had ordered. Alexander remembered that he was the only one to drink the tea. As he lay dying in the hospital, he told authorities about his suspicions. As police began investigating, they carefully traced the two men's paths. They discovered that Kovtun had left traces of polonium in the house he had been staying at in Hamburg before coming to London, as well as in his car. When investigators began looking, they found traces of polonium in the men's hotel room, restaurant tables, and even on a shisha pipe. Radiation was also found in the men's bathroom at the Millennium Hotel. Alexander's poisoning is believed to have exposed 700 people to radiation, but at such a low level that no one else became sick. Alexander had been right about the tea, and investigators discovered a hot teapot in the Millennium Hotel, meaning it was radioactive. Alexander's wife accused Moscow of sending Kovtun and Lugovoy to kill him, though she never named anyone who she thought gave the command, specifically out of fear for her own life. Scotland Yard made a statement saying, "The evidence suggests that the only credible explanation is in one way or another, the Russian state is involved in Litvinenko's murder." After suffering for 22 days, on November 22, 2006, Alexander's heart failed and he died. Because of political implications, it is only suspected that he was assassinated. Though Kovtun and Lugovoy denied any role in Alexander's poisoning and death, a witness came forward to say that they had heard Kovtun refer to Alexander as a traitor, who he intended to make an example of. There is an irony to the fact that shortly after Alexander died, Kovtun was hospitalized for radiation poisoning. Lugovoy was named as the primary suspect in Alexander's death, while Kovtun was said to be the second suspect. Russia has refused to extradite either men to be charged or receive a trial. Alexander spent his last few days alive making sure to gather as much evidence as possible against the men he believed to have poisoned him, and perhaps one day they will see justice. Today's third and final case is just as shocking as the previous two, and it shows the importance of trusting one's own instincts. Russ Stagger worked as a football coach at Durham High School. In that position, he was popular and well-liked. In the late 1970s, he had divorced his first wife, Jo Lynn Snow, after 5 years, and though they were both sad to have their relationship end, they remained friends. However, Russ felt lonely after his divorce and missed that close relationship with someone he trusted. It was a year later that he met the beautiful widowed 31-year-old Barbara Terry. Their meeting seemed like the perfect story, accidentally bumping into each other when she came to see a house he was selling, and they both instantly felt a strong attraction. After a whirlwind romance, Russ proposed to Barbara after only a few months of dating, and the seemingly happy couple married in 1979. Russ even adopted Barbara's 2 sons she had during her previous marriage. Russ continued his job and also began teaching driver's ed, while Barbara, who was known to be the perfect homemaker, worked as a secretary at Duke University and as an ad salesperson for a radio station. She was even an aspiring author. The couple reportedly needed both jobs, as they were known by friends and family to spend money almost as fast as they made it, buying new clothes, cars, and even a beach getaway. However, not everything was as it seemed. Russ soon discovered that Barbara had been lying to him about their finances, and the couple was deeply in debt. Allegedly, Barbara had even forged his signature on financial paperwork, and there are claims that she had begun a scheme with the banks by borrowing money from one and paying it off with a loan from another. She also had allegedly lied to Russ and the banks about selling a novel for $100,000, when in fact she had been rejected by a publishing house. Regardless, she reportedly used a forged letter, made from the rejection letter, as collateral in order to keep receiving loans. When Barbara explained that she had gotten in over her head, Russ eventually forgave her, but insisted that from then on, he would be the one in charge of their finances. He believed that they could pay off the debt. They only had to cut the extravagant buying and move to a smaller house. Russ even asked his parents for help paying for the debt, which they agreed to. Something that is important to know about Russ is that he often slept with a handgun below his pillow, just in case of any emergency during the night. It was said that Barbara liked knowing that they could use it to protect themselves if they needed to, which is exactly what ended up happening. Or at least, that was the story. On February 1st, 1988, Barbara woke to the sound of someone moving in their house. When she looked over, Russ was fast asleep next to her. It could have been her two boys, but something told Barbara it was an intruder. In her sleep-muddled mind, she thought it best that she check out the noise before alerting the whole family in case it was nothing. Barbara reached for the gun under Russ's pillow, and that's when everything went wrong. When she tried to move it, the gun accidentally went off, shooting Russ in the back of the head. Horrified, Barbara called 911 at 6:08 a.m., and EMTs rushed to the house. At first, there seemed to be some hope, as Russ was still alive when they arrived. But he died a few hours later. The police investigated this strange and shocking death and concluded that Barbara wasn't lying, and the gun had truly gone off accidentally. But it was Russ's first wife, Jolynn, who couldn't accept that Russ's death was an accident. She began campaigning to have the case reopened and told police that Russ had confided to her that Barbara mistreated him and he was afraid of her. He also told her that if anything happened to him, Barbara did it. The problem was, even though the police may have been interested in pursuing Russ's death as more than an accident, there was no proof. This is until a student was snooping around a locker at the high school where Russ had worked. Within the locker was a tape made by Russ. The student brought the tape to the authorities, who were shocked to hear what Russ had recorded. Russ had begun to feel unsafe around his wife and suspicious about some of her actions. He decided that the best thing he could do was create an audio diary detailing some of the things that she had done. In the recording, he talked about their debts and Barbara's unwillingness to stop spending money, as well as her expectation that he provide the life for her that she wanted. But more interestingly, Russ also recorded that he had recently caught Barbara having an affair, one he had witnessed himself by walking into the room and catching her kissing another man. The last entry that Russ had made was 3 days before his death, and it was the most telling. Russ told the recorder that she continued waking him up in the night, trying to give him pills. He said, quote, "Last night, she woke me up and gave me what she said was 2 aspirins. She stood there to see if I took it. I did not take it. When he looked closer in the morning, he found out that the pills were not aspirin, but actually sleeping pills." Forensics were soon deployed and discovered that Barbara's story about the gun accidentally going off didn't actually make sense. It revealed that the gun was never kept under the pillow as Barbara claimed, but actually in a side drawer. And Russ also didn't ever keep the gun loaded. As well, because of the model of the gun, it required 4 pounds of pressure on the trigger, which couldn't have been done accidentally. Barbara was soon arrested under suspicion of murder. While in court, it was revealed that Barbara's first husband had died in a similar manner, earning her the nickname a Black Widow Killer. Larry Ford, Barbara's first husband, had died after an allegedly accidental shooting in High Point, North Carolina. In this case, Barbara claimed that Larry's gun went off while he was cleaning it. This shooting, too, was seen as a tragic mishap. In Russ's tape, he expressed his own suspicion that Barbara's first husband's death hadn't been an accident. Allegedly, Barbara's motive in Russ's death was a $170,000 life insurance policy, as she couldn't stand the lower-budget lifestyle they had recently adopted. Because of the tapes, not only did police have enough suspicion to look deeper into Barbara, but because of his recordings, the jury heard Russ's own voice telling them just how fearful he was of his wife. Barbara Stagger was convicted in 1989 for murdering Russ and given the death penalty. However, this was commuted. She is currently serving life in prison. Though these surprising cases of people solving their own deaths and naming their killers after they have passed may seem like a phenomenon, it happens more often than you may think.